Lodro Rinzler is a teacher in the Shambhala Buddhist tradition. He has written such books as The Buddha Walks into a Bar and Buddha Walks into an Office. He also recently opened up a non-denominational meditation center in Manhattan. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's nice to have you here. Finally, after trying to arrange this, and we all got it all together, and here you are.
Yeah.
So in this segment, we're going to be practicing a practice. We're going to learn a new meditation practice. Which one are you going to teach us?
So this is known as Shamatha, or calm abiding meditation. There's many different iterations of this. You know, it comes from the Buddhist tradition. It's said to be the same practice that the Buddha did 2,600 years ago, but is commonly known today as mindfulness meditation, because we're just being fully present, mindful of the breath.
And this specific one that you're going to teach us comes from which particular specific tradition?
So I come from the Shambhala Buddhist tradition, which stems from Tibetan Buddhism. So this has been done in monasteries and out in the wild, so to speak, for thousands of years. And it's the nice thing about these particular practices, they're all time-tested. It's not like anyone in the Buddhist tradition said, oh, let's make this up and maybe it'll work for me, it'll work for you. It's like this is a good way to actually develop more calm, focus, productivity in your day-to-day life. But for me personally, it's always been about being present with something as simple as the breath, so that we're present with the rest of our life, all of the wonderful things in our life and also the painful things. We show up authentically and fully for them.
Tell me a little bit about Shambhala.
So Shambhala came over from Tibetan Buddhism. It descends from Kagyu and Nyingma lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, which are two of the main four lineages. And Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who is a Kagyu Lama, came to the United States and began teaching, and then realized, I mean, this is sort of like before this became very trendy, he realized that there were a lot of people out there that were not going to become Buddhist. They weren't going to run off and form a monastery. They were going to just live a secular life, and they could benefit from the practices of meditation. So he set up what was known as Shambhala Training, which was a series of secular weekends, it still is, of training in how to actually get in touch with your inherent peacefulness, goodness, wholeness, completeness, and then doing that through the practice of meditation.
I feel like I want to ask you a little bit more about Trungpa. So he was a Tibetan, and when did he come to the United States, or what's a little bit about his background?
Sure. So he was raised from a very early age to be a traditional monastic, but when China invaded Tibet, he actually led several hundred people through the mountains into India, received a full scholarship over to Oxford, went over there, and that's where he encountered Western mind and realized that, you know, a lot of the Westerners were treating him as something other, some sort of holy man up on a mountain, when he wanted to just talk to them like you and I are right now. So he actually shed his robe. It was very a black sheep moment for him, and started dressing, you know, as a hippie, sometimes flannel shirts, sometimes cowboy hats, all sorts of different outfits, learned English, started speaking in the jargon of the day, and taught meditation. And it was so against what had been previously done that people were shocked. But he was actually very effective in terms of Western mind. So he came to the United States, and his early speaking tour in the late 60s was, people said, what do you want to talk about? You know, the Buddhist creation of ego and how that actually gets unfolded through emptiness teachings. And he said, no, let's talk about work, sex, and money, because that's what people actually want to talk about. So he did. And as a result, all these little meditation groups started sprouting up, studying those teachings in a very traditional framework, and then applying it to their everyday life, which is really important. So having been raised in the Shambhala Buddhist tradition, it's always been important for me to think not only how do we meditate, but how does this meditation apply to the rest of our life?
So maybe we can do a little bit of a practice. So tell me, before we do it, tell me what we're going to be doing.
So we're going to do something focused on the breath. And I think you might have even had people on the show before who did something similar, where you're just focusing on the physical sensation of the out-breath and the in-breath. But here, I want to do a slight variation where we, since I've been talking so much about being in the world, where we actually start to take in all of the other things that are going on. So there's two aspects that are said to be innate in terms of our own mind. One is mindfulness, as I mentioned before. The other is awareness. So mindfulness is the ability to bring our full mind to something, like the breath. And then the awareness is we can actually take in everything else. The fact that we have a feeling of connection to the ground beneath us, the sounds in the room, all of these various things are also just what's going on right now. So meditation really can be just a training in being present with whatever is going on. And if we could actually include our awareness as part of the practice, then it can become very profound in terms of just tuning in throughout the rest of our day and being present with whatever arises.
Okay, should we try it?
Let's try it.
Okay.
Okay. So if you are at home, you could just take a posture where you want to feel simultaneously uplifted but relaxed. So you don't need to tense up your body in any way or do anything too special. You could sit cross-legged like Kathy is, or you could sit like me, where your feet are just placed firmly on the ground. Either is fine. And you want to really get that sense of connection to the earth beneath you, feeling your weight evenly distributed across your sits bones, and then actually lifting up through the spine itself. Noticing where you might be holding some tension in your body, you can breathe a sense of relaxation into that area. So relaxing the shoulders, for example, relaxing the muscles in your neck. And if it's helpful, you could just pick your hands up at the axis point of your elbows, drop them palms down on your thighs. A lot of us spend our time slouching all day over a computer, over a desk. It might feel a little uncomfortable at first to lift up through the spine. So placing our hands in this way actually gives us a little bit of extra support. We tuck in the chin ever so slightly. And relax the muscles in our face. So uncreasing the forehead. Relaxing the muscles around the eyes and the cheeks and our jaw.
Yeah.
So our jaw may even hang open, which is fine. You can just place your tongue up against the roof of your mouth, allowing for clear breathing. Now, in some traditions, people encourage you to close your eyes during meditation. And if you're someone that's always done that, that might be most comfortable to you. But if you're relatively new to meditation, I recommend just keeping your eyes a little bit open, just about half open. So the lids are drooping a little bit. We just relax our gaze about 3 to 4 feet ahead of us on the ground in a completely loose and unfocused manner. One of my favorite words in the Tibetan tradition for meditation is gom. But it can also be translated as become familiar with or familiarization. So here we're just becoming familiar at this moment with our body, noticing what's coming up in the body. And then we can bring our full attention to our breath. Just feeling the in-breath and the out-breath as it moves through us. And here we don't have to change or alter our breathing at all. We just allow it to occur as it always does. However you're breathing is fine. At a certain point, you'll notice that your mind wants to run away. It's off to the races. You're starting to think about all the things you need to do later on in the day, your whole to-do list, or reliving something from the past. When you find that you're no longer present with the breath, this is a really wonderful opportunity to train the mind, to just focus on one thing. So we can gently and silently say to ourselves, thinking, just to acknowledge the thought. And then having acknowledged it, we come back to the breath. We come back to the present moment. Now we can get a little bit larger, so we keep about a quarter of our attention on our breathing. But we allow the rest of our mind to take in everything else in our environment. So we have an awareness of our physical form resting here, the connection of our legs or our feet on the ground, the grumbling of our stomach if we're hungry, the sounds of the space itself. Whatever smells may arise. All of the things that we perceive through our senses. Whatever comes up is also part of our present experience. So we keep about a quarter of our attention on the breath. About the other 3/4 takes in everything else. Similarly, when we get lost in thought, we can just catch ourselves and gently steer ourselves back to the breath, thinking, come back to the breath. And then once we're rooted in the breath, we get a little larger again, taking in whatever we see and smell, hear, all of it. Remembering that whatever we perceive is not for us or against us, it's just part of what's going on right now, part of our present experience. Okay.
I have a lot of questions.
Okay, great.
I think my first question is going to be, why eyes open versus eyes closed?
This is a good question. So I get this question a lot. Over at Mindful, we have all different styles of meditation introduced, and I found that people who are used to meditating with their eyes closed have the hardest time meditating with their eyes open, which is why I gave the option for people who are watching. But there's two answers. One is the practical answer, one's the view answer. The view around why we might want to keep our eyes open is we're doing the same practice that the Buddha did. We're waking up to what's going on right now. So if that's what our intention is, to wake up, it seems counterthetical to keep our eyes closed, just in terms of how that rolls. The practical answer is, particularly here in New York, we are tired so much. We're such a tired group of people. I imagine everyone is, I think we often don't get enough sleep. So if someone meditates with their eyes closed, they might find themselves nodding off more. I just got back from leading a week-long meditation retreat in Colorado, And I noticed that there were days when people would stay up late, and then the next day it was like a ripple effect of people just doing the jerk, like they're sitting upright, and then they have to keep correcting themselves from falling over from the meditation seat. So if people love meditating with their eyes closed, I would never discourage it. But in this particular practice, there is some reason around why we would want to keep our eyes open.
And that's kind of a Shambhala thing, or is it a Tibetan thing?
Both, yeah. I mean, you're going to find different teachers in different areas will always emphasize different things. So in particular, I mentioned this is, in the Tibetan system, this is actually good to keep your palms down. It's known as resting energy. It helps to calm and settle the mind. In some other meditation traditions, you'll find people say, palms up. It's more open and receptive. So it's very interesting to see how these things have changed culture by culture, and we're still figuring out exactly what American Buddhism will look like. But in terms of Shambhala Buddhism, yes, it's generally taught with eyes open.
Well, I think that Trungpa was really big into gearing stuff towards the Westerners, right? I mean, isn't that true?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's interesting to see how these very traditional Tibetan teachings, having left the monasteries, are still being integrated. So some of the really traditional stuff that was like meant for leadership within monastic communities, all of a sudden is being applied to the business world, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it really is. This practice that we did today with the breath, it's just sort of the very basic, right, for Shambhala. What else can we learn in Shambhala? Can you tell me a little bit more about
Absolutely. I mean, this is even considered a little bit advanced, just because if someone wanted to get going and they only wanted to do the first part of what we did, just resting with the breath entirely, that's a wonderful practice, and that's what I often introduce. But knowing that this has probably been introduced here before, I wanted to also offer the alternative where we keep that quarter of the attention, but we also take in the larger environment. Now, there's different emphases as you continue to do the Shambhala training levels within that tradition. In terms of that technique, it's often breath-based. But then if you go on and you study some of the traditional Vajrayana teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, there's things known as nundro, preliminary practices, where you do, under the guidance of an authorized and really wonderful teacher, things like prostrations and mantra recitation and mandala creation and visualization practices. And there's a lot of view around why those are important. But the interesting thing about these practices is that having done many, many of them, I noticed that at the end of the practice, I'm still left with my breath in my mind. So this the shamatha thing of just resting with the breath is actually, it's not like we're ever going to leave this aspect in meditation of dealing with and befriending ourselves through this technique of coming back to the breath.
I think that with the Shambhala tradition, isn't there like the 5 levels? There's 5 levels of training that people can either go away to do or do for weekends. In New York City, they offer them for like a long weekend.
Yeah, that's spot on. So it's a consecutive training program so that people can do an introduction, and honestly, people can do that Shambhala training level 1, get a lot out of it, and just meditate on their own if they wanted going forward. A lot of times people want to go deeper with their study, so there's other programs that build on that, as well as a whole weekday series of evening classes that are about meditation and then how you integrate it into the rest of your life.
And so those other practices, the prostrations, the mantras, the mandalas, which are the pictures, right, the round pictures, those are practices that first you do the level 5 training and then you can
is that right? It's interesting because there is a secular track of, I want to just learn meditation in Shambhala, which is the Shambhala training levels, and that's wonderful. And for people who want to actually explore Tibetan Buddhism, there's also tracks for that. And then as you go further down those, you can learn those other practices for sure.
So the starting point would be like to start the level trainings. Or
I think that's always a good starting point for people.
I mean, in New York, we're kind of privileged where we have like a lot of the stuff is here. And so in New York, there's centers that people can go to and sort of really get introduced to it.
It used to be that you could go, if you wanted to study Tibetan Buddhism, you had to go all the way to Tibet. And then if you're like, oh, maybe I'm interested in Japanese Zen, you had to go to Japan. And now, you could go to Chelsea here in New York and do both in an hour. You could check them all out. So that's sort of a very unique time and place for us in terms of exploring, which is why I often recommend that people, obviously I'm very partial to Shambhala, having been raised in it and then also having taught in it for 15 years. But, I think it's important that people explore what they most connect to.
Right. So with Trungpa, wasn't he really a creative soul? Wasn't he very creative? And I think that really flavors Shambhala a lot. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think, both Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and now his son who succeeded him, Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche, both very creative people. Trungpa Rinpoche, in addition to writing plays, he also did flower arrangement and poetry, and all of these things while also founding institutions like Naropa University and all these various meditation centers around the country. So there is both sides, which is very interesting. And similarly for his son Sakyong Mipham Rinpoche, my Buddhist teacher, is a marathon runner and a poet and has written many books and in just really wonderful different ways.
Didn't he write a book about running?
Running with the Mind of Meditation.
Right. I haven't read it. Did you read it?
It's lovely. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because it's like, okay, if we're going to actually do meditation practice, we have to realize that's practice for the rest of our life. And that means that we don't necessarily always have to take a break. Oh, I'm running. That's something different. No, I can bring my mind. My mind's already going to be working overtime while I'm running. How can I work with my mind even while I'm doing that activity?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are runners, I am not, I think they feel like running is a form of meditation.
Yeah. And it's a great book, and I recommend it for those people for sure.
Yeah, and I think that that sort of rhythmic kind of activity of those steps, over and over and over, and the breath. I mean, I'm not a runner, but I imagine that there's no way to get around the meditative part of it.
I think you're right.
That you kind of keep going, and it's like that rhythm of bing, 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 which is what we're trying to do sitting here. But maybe what we should do is take up running. Maybe we need to take up running.
I think it's so personal. I really do. I mean, obviously, having done a lot of just sitting meditation, I'm partial to that as well. But for some people, they need movement. For some people, they need mantra-based meditation, which is more in the Vedic style. For some people...
And mantras are what?
Mantra can be translated as to protect the mind. So it's often a word or a sound or a phrase that one would recite as a way to actually focus the mind. In the Vedic system, which is different than the Buddhist system, it really is to cause deep relaxation in the body. So it's very interesting that there's so many different types. And that's why I think, the reason that we created Mindful, the meditation studio that I co-founded here in New York, is so that people could explore so many different types and then figure out what works best for them.
I think also with your practice, actually not even with most Buddhist practices, there's also walking meditation, which we hadn't really talked about. So,
can we introduce that briefly? Do we have a minute?
Well,
1 minute.
Okay.
If you were interested in walking meditation, it's basically instead of focusing on the breath, you focus on the actual movement of your body. You could just take your left hand, wrap it around, place your right hand on top, just holding that at your navel, and you walk at a little bit of a slower pace than you would, much slower pace than you would here in New York, but than you would in your own home. And you actually focus on that awareness of the environment of the space, but also just feeling it as your foot leaves the ground, travels through space, lands on the heel, rolls as the other foot comes up. Just paying attention to that simple movement can actually be really, really beneficial. For people who hate the idea of sitting meditation, that's always an option too.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and that you can kind of do anywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Although maybe not in the busy streets. Don't go to Times Square.
Don't do it in Times Square.
No walking in Times Square.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's almost no movement in Times Square.
That's true. Maybe
doing something else.
Right.
It is. I guess it could be a different kind of movement.
Jostling meditation. Yeah. Shoving meditation.
That's right.
Yes.
Shoving meditation. Get out of my way, meditation. So we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to see if there was anything else that you wanted to add about Shambhala or practice that you thought might be pertinent.
Yeah, I think it's really worth giving meditation practice a try. It's sort of like going to the gym, and you can't go to the gym once and be like, I didn't lose 10 pounds. The gym doesn't work for me. You know that it takes time. It's the same thing with meditation. So if someone was interested in doing this practice, they could do it for 10 minutes a day, and over time you start to really see the effects in the same way that you would if you went to the gym regularly.
And what would the effects be?
You would probably feel a little bit more calm. I personally think that I'm a kinder person because I meditate.
Yeah.
I notice
Really
when I don't meditate as much, I'm like, gosh, I'm sort of angry and a jerk.
Maybe
It's almost like
just living in New York.
maybe it's just living in New York. So maybe we need meditation. Yeah.
I mean, do you really think? I mean, in what way though? Because we're just talking about. Well, maybe your practice is different, but I mean, do you think it's because particular practices you're doing, or do you just purely think it's because you're doing breath meditation?
I think it's that moment when we drift off and we don't beat ourselves up for thinking, oh, you jerk, you're thinking you're the worst meditator. We'd say, oh, it's not a big deal. We offer ourselves a little moment of kindness. And the more we actually train ourselves in that as well, not just being focused on the breath, but the kindness too, the more we'll be able to integrate that into our life as well.
Yeah, and so we're just carrying that over into our regular life, that kindness that we carry to ourselves, just sort of you know.
We then have a well that we can draw from and
whatever.
offering it to others. Yeah.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
It was really nice to have you here.
Thanks for
and to
having me.
talk about Shambhala.